Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Mitch Simkins, and this is Wins for Widows, where you get practical advice from the mouth of professionals who, all of us working together, help you get your feet back on the ground after the experience and the loss of a loved one. Together, we'll uncover the rooted question that you might be asking, what now? And what do I do next? Today, I am super excited to introduce you to and to host with us Lindsey Lewis. She is the managing director and chair of the Center for Women in Financial Services at the American College. Her work sits at the intersection of research, advisor education, and real client experience, and brings both technical expertise and a real thoughtful perspective on how we show up for clients during life's most pivotal moments, which is this one, the loss of a spouse. Very pivotal. So, Lindsey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and excited to be here.
I'm excited you're here.
In addition to the work that I do at the American College, I went back to being an advisor as well.
And I know you've got a lot of great education and background, went to UVU and did the PFP program, which is awesome. My son is doing the same. He graduates next year. So yeah, I know a little about that program.
It's an amazing program, and I love it because everything you learn in school, like in other degrees, you're like, will I ever use the Pythagorean theorem again? However, everything I learned in my undergrad program, I use in my own life, right? Income tax planning, estate planning, retirement planning, all of the above. So definitely great choice by your son to go through that program.
No, he's loving it. Yeah. It's been a great thing. And I've actually had employees come out of there over the years, and they're amazing. They're awesome. So we discussed how about 90% of women become the primary financial decision maker at some point, right? Women outlive men by an average, I think, 11 years. Is that right? Give or take?
Depends if they were partnered or not, but 8 to 11 years, yes.
Okay. So this will happen. And yet financial inaction is common as losing a spouse. So from your research, what is actually happening beneath that surface? Is it just grief? Are there hidden societal or psychological barriers that cause women to hesitate when taking the financial reins? Man, I experience this. I feel it. I see the sheer anxiety that it causes. And so why? What's going on there?
There are a myriad of reasons, but I'm going to put them into a couple of buckets. So first is the behavioral finance side, right? So when you experience a traumatic event, death, a loss of a loved one, etc., you do not have the full cognitive functionality of your brain, right? So the executive functioning is decreasing. And especially for a variety of women, they have not built a foundation around financial well-being and financial literacy, right? If I don't have a knowledge or understanding prior to a traumatic event, then it's layering on another piece. So if you look at the research, like from other behavioral scientists like Daniel Crosby, executive functioning or cognitive overload is happening. And so they don't have the ability to make great decisions. Usually what happens is you kind of have your mind is mush when you experience that loss. And then you have so many moving parts. You have like logistics that have to happen immediately. And then you have big picture things, right? So one exercise that we love to take clients through is just to write everything down that they're, feeling emotions about, right? Like, I don't know what flowers to choose for the funeral. I don't know how to get a death certificate. I don't know where to find the will. I don't know what bank account. I don't know what credit card. I don't know what this. So you write them all down into like this big cluster. And then as a financial professional, what our job is to do is to organize that and to put it into like systematic processes. What happens is that people also need to gain confidence in their own decision-making ability. Like I mentioned, like 90% of women will be the primary financial decision maker at some point in their life, whether that's death, disability, divorce, underemployment, decreased capacity, etc. So at some point, you're going to have to test these exercises. But for some women that might not have done it during their marriage, and then this is the first time that they're having to make all of those decisions. And it can be overwhelming, right? What we see that's different between widows versus widowers is that widows might get overwhelmed by financial decisions or have reduced confidence in that. What we see from widowers is that they have a harder time with like the emotional side and some of the day-to-day logistics, right? So people are experiencing at different levels. So we have the behavioral finance side. Additionally, you have the pop culture and narratives that are happening, right? So when you look at women and how they relate to money, two-thirds of articles that are written to women are around like budgeting, coupon clip, etc. And then majority of articles that are written to men are about like invest, grow, build. So you have this underlying culture of women maybe not understanding all of the investment picture or retirement picture in addition to that. So you have, your cognitive overload, inability to make decisions, you have your behavioral finance and some inertia that's happening, and then you have these pop culture narratives. One thing I always recommend for women is to start learning about your financial well-being and financial literacy as early as possible, because there is going to be a point in your life, most likely based on statistics, that you are going to have to be that primary financial decision maker. And what I had witnessed with some women is that they're trying to learn this after the death of a loved one or after a divorce, and maybe don't even know how to like log onto the computer, let alone access all their retirement accounts, let alone understand the difference with different asset classes, let
Yeah.
alone understand
Yeah.
the intricacies there. So
It's
my
massive.
recommendation always is to like start as early as possible.
Interesting. I love that. And I try as part of the community to bring in people who haven't lost a spouse yet, and to begin that while their spouse is still alive, while they're there, because it's a heck of a lot easier to gather information during that period. But I don't often see that. I think there's a societal. I love that you're bringing up this societal norm. I think it contributes significantly to what I see for women and their confidence that they feel. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's the way that it is. So what do we do? Like, what's the solution, Lindsey? What do we do to fix that societal norm? How do we encourage confidence for women before loss so that then the loss isn't, because I keep hearing like, I'm just terrible at this. I'm terrible at that. I don't know what I'm doing, right? And then you got grief on top of that, and those two just do not mix at all.
Yeah.
So how do we get that confidence before and even, I guess, during the intersection of grief and finances?
Yeah. So confidence is just trusted behavior over time through repetition. And so just starting to learn as soon as possible is important. We joked on our intro call that I like to say if you can follow a whole season of The Bachelorette or The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives or whatever, you do have the capacity to learn this. And it really is like a time component, right? There are some amazing resources at the American College. We have a course called Know Yourself, Grow Your Wealth. You can complete it in fewer than 12 hours. And you
Awesome.
can get at least a fundamental knowledge there, especially with AI and also the democratization of financial knowledge. The access and the ability to access has never been easier than it has been in the history of the world. I
I love
think,
that.
you think
That's awesome.
I might not be good at this or you're self selecting, but
Love
you
that.
actually have to zoom out bigger. So I'm really focused on women and girls here, but girls' confidence in math peaks at age 9.
Wow.
So that is the 3rd grade. Right? So
Wow.
that's when they're feeling the most confident in the United States about math.
Wow.
Then they start self-selecting out of STEM related fields by the age of like 13, 14 and stop raising their hand in class
Mm.
around, freshman year of high school. So it goes through like pop culture and confidence, right?
So it's the culture, it's society, it's peer pressure, it's maybe they did and somebody said, "Hey, don't do that again," or they sense that that's probably something they shouldn't continue doing.
And I think you have like narratives that are happening within like
Social
puberty and like
media.
wanting,
Okay.
that type of aspect. The
Okay.
other thing is that they've also done this with women in tests. If they add don't know or not sure, women are more likely to choose that bucket. But if they remove that, they're actually more likely to choose the correct answer, even if they don't know. But they're hopping into that
Interesting.
like not sure, don't know bucket.
Interesting.
So you have so many things there. Their advice that they're getting for the last 200 years is more risk adverse than, we have so many different barriers. What I
Yep.
think is so
Yep.
important is that women have the ability to access quality financial knowledge, and it just takes a little bit of curiosity. Also, the concepts, for the most part, unless you're getting really technical, aren't above like basic algebra, even if that, right? So you do have the ability. Math should not be the barrier, even though to be a great financial advisor, you do have to know math, but like math should not be the barrier for individuals getting in. And it really is a relationship piece of how does this retirement account or this type of account affect me from my tax perspective? So it really is a relation to one another, and it is about putting the time in. But like,
Yeah.
especially for widows, it's going to be very difficult after the death of a loved one because you don't have the full cognitive functionality. You don't
Right.
have as much executive functioning of your brain. You have an identity disruption. You have, a system mismatch. You have so many other logistics that you're navigating, but there are still some quality resources that you can have there. My like one area of caution there is that there are predatory people in that space though, right? And so it is important to try and get as educated as possible so you don't get exploited financially by someone who's trying to sell you a product or service that you don't need.
And that's so hard. Oh my gosh, I sense that all the time. There's just this concern, and rightly so, that they're safe. And that's it's a challenge to be able to show that safety and that they're it's okay for them to come and learn. I love what you're saying about through the American College. I want to get the link for that and put it in the show notes as well,
Absolutely.
because I love that you're talking about education. And I think there is the sense that it's very complicated. And yeah, there's parts of finance and investing that are complicated, but truthfully, it doesn't have to be. And there's so many cool services. There's free services. There's very, very inexpensive services. There's advisors that can help through the complications of that, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. They don't have to know um, not to buy, double down Russia, right? Or all these
Or only
technical.
buying NVIDIA. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. They just need to know the basics, and so no, I love that. I love that you're bringing that, and the education piece is great, and we'll lean on you to help us get that piece of it together. Another thing we talked about is underinsured folks, right? Life insurance is a big piece to the transition. Often becomes a huge gift for someone who has lost a spouse to be able to carry on for that. And then the question usually comes about, now, what about me? What do I do? How do I protect my children? What I see is it's like, especially if it was a really, really hard transition, the first desire is to make sure it never happens again for their kids, right? It's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. That's heightened. I don't want to do this again to my family. So around life insurance, what do you recommend? What's the coverage? Is there a true easy way to figure out like how much life insurance a widow should have for her children?
Yeah, as a true financial advisor, it depends, but a couple of things to think about. Frequently, what you'll see in hetero couples, let's say we'll use like a male working spouse, might have appropriate coverage, right? A couple million or whatever through employer and part of their own plans. Frequently, what I'm seeing is that, let's say it's a female spouse and they are a stay-at-home parent with the children. Frequently, you're seeing them underinsured. They might not have very much life insurance. They might only have like 250 grand or something
Yeah,
like that.
for sure.
But what's important is to calculate the work that they're doing. Anywhere between like $100 to $150,000 a year of work of a stay-at-home parent. That's cooking, cleaning, childcare. I had 2 kids in daycare at the same time. We're talking anywhere between $30 to $40,000 of daycare expenses,
Well,
not including like home expenses, all that. So
yeah, yeah,
what I'm seeing is that the stay-at-home parent is severely underinsured. And we talk about, widows in that sense, but we could have widowers too, where if let's say your stay-at-home parent were to pass away, you might want to spend some time decompressing, right? And maybe you want to take a year off of work, and that would be your annual salary. Plus, then, however young your kids are until they hit 18, plus all that childcare. So you're talking, you could be in a multi-million dollar policy amount without even batting an eye. But one thing that's cool about insuring women is that, especially if they're in good health and you start early, getting a 30-year term plan or one of those solutions can be really cost effective, right? So you could get $1 million policies for $50 a month or something like that, right? So it can be really cost effective. And some people are like, is it worth writing the check? And I think if you have chatted with anyone who's experienced loss through widowhood like a relationship, like it's 100% worth it, right? So I think the biggest tragedy that I've seen is that, someone tragically passed away and they had an appointment for insurance the week after, right? And so trying to do it as early as possible. We'll joke with my girlfriends. We were all at the pool with our kids last summer. One of them, we were just talking about life insurance, and they were like, I don't have life insurance. I'm like, okay, open your phone and we're going to get you a quote immediately and we're going to like get it done today. There's so much inertia. The thing is that people don't like to think about their own demise. It's statistically speaking, in current state, like you are going to pass away at some point, whether it's on your timeline or a different timeline. And so trying to mitigate as much risk as possible, as early as possible. And then what's important, if you did experience loss, you had a loved one pass away, and let's say you have children and you want to protect, your assets, or you want to give something to them in the future, getting insured then, right? Like if we do at age 60, the rates are very different than if you did it at 30, right? So you do have to think about that and like starting as early as possible. Also, if you start as early as possible, there's a possibility you can get like guaranteed insurability to like increase your amount. Let's say you experience breast cancer or some other illness, Hashimoto's or something else that might make it a little bit more challenging for you to get life insurance down the road. That's why like planning as early as possible. But even if you didn't plan as early as possible, there are still options out there. And you want to work with someone who is a fiduciary and has your best interest and looking for what policies would make sense. As it relates to insuring your kids is also it depends. I have insurance policies on my kiddos for my own specific reasonings, but for other people, you might want to do that. So there are a variety of solutions. I think insurance can be a powerful tool, but I also think insurance can be exploitative if it's used incorrectly. So it's just making sure you're working with someone who's a qualified,
Yep.
competent individual that's making those
Yep.
recommendations.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how you feel about insurance. I say to 99, maybe 95% of the clients I work with, buy term and
Yes.
invest elsewhere. I mean, it's really inexpensive. Like you said, especially if you're younger, you can really leverage a lot of coverage by a very small amount of premium. Where if you're starting to get into whole life or some of the other universal life policies, it starts to get pricey. And there's a place for that, right?
Correct.
But term insurance can be very inexpensive. The other thought I had, and I love your comments about like watching to see what you've done. I had a close friend of mine who died of ALS several years ago, and they believed that they were going to be fine. That in terms of insurance, they had a policy. Come to find out, after he passed, the policy didn't cover what they thought that it would cover. There somehow was able to be a loophole, right? And I've seen that in a couple of cases where there's been this loophole. So I think the other piece is also to look and see what you've got and look at the fine print to see under what conditions might it just be nullified, and do
Yeah.
it as early as you can so that something's not a surprise. Because it was very difficult, very hard in the transition where there was a plan for it and it wasn't there. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
cheap.
Terms and conditions for
Yep.
sure. You got to read through
Yep.
those.
Yep.
Absolutely.
For
And
sure.
that's something that when you're partnered with a quality financial professional, like you should be reviewing whether it's on an annual basis or biannual basis, like
Good point.
being up to date on
Good
everything.
point. Love it. Love it. Thank you. You also made a fun, cheeky quote when we talked before, Lindsey. Not that you're cheeky, but this was really funny. Every marriage is going to end in death or divorce, and I hope that yours ends in death.
Yes,
And
that's
as
from
we
James
talked about,
Sexton.
okay, you're not taking full credit for
I'm
that.
not taking credit for that, but I did hear it on a podcast.
I was at a viewing the other night, and the family said, we've known she's going to pass for years, and we haven't done anything. We haven't done obituary, and now we're in the throes of it, right? And so we talked a lot about like why that happens. But what are your thoughts? Why is it so difficult for us to even really like go there? And what do we pay for that when we don't? Why don't we go?
Yeah, people don't want to face their own mortality. People would rather talk about a variety of different topics than, the fact that one day they will not be alive on this earth. So even planning from an estate planning process, right? Getting wills, advance directives, getting trusts in place, that process there's a lot of inertia there because you do have to face the reality of your own demise, right? So people don't want to do that. Also, what happens when someone passes away, we talked about the behavioral finance. We do have what's called emotionally encoded money. So sometimes when people receive a death benefit from a spouse passing away, how they feel about that money can be different than how they feel about other money.
Interesting.
So if they are income producing themselves and I'm generating money, I might feel differently than receiving a death benefit amount. So sometimes with a death benefit, especially like if you utilize it in like a military setting, right? If someone passed away in war, sometimes those receiving spouses want to give the money away because the emotionally encoded money story that they're telling themselves is that this is blood money and this was at a loss of a loved one and I don't want to keep it. I want to keep my hands away
Interesting.
from it. So you
Interesting.
have to have these
Yeah,
reality checks of
that's
what
great.
money means
I
to
love
you.
that. I love that. Emotionally encoded. Thank you. That
Emotionally encoded money, which also
that's
happens in
amazing.
divorce. So emotionally encoded money happens in divorce. So let's say you separate and, like you're paying alimony or you're getting child support. How you feel about that money is different than how you feel about other money.
Yeah.
So mitigating that risk is really important. And then understanding that how you're going to feel about money after that is going to change. So people just don't want to face their own mortality. And what they can experience if they don't do that is that you have a lot of headache with logistics, like planning logistics after someone dies, right? Like planning a funeral is a lot of logistics, getting new bank accounts, getting new credit cards, having, things close, opening new accounts, like all of that is a lot of inertia. And so if you can best prepare for it, I think the best client scenario I had that I had an example of this is that there was a man, he was very financially literate. He could have managed the portfolio all on his own, but then he had a chronic illness and was diagnosed with cancer and like knew he was going to pass away. So the immediate thing when he got that diagnosis is that he signed up to have a financial advisor, myself, and to build that relationship with his spouse, his wife.
Mm,
And that was because he wanted to make sure she was going to be taken care
protect
of
her.
and that she had someone to help her make those decisions.
Love that.
So at some point you are going to pass away, and at some point, and I'm so sorry for any of you that have experienced loss. It is so heartbreaking and so traumatic and so many things that have to happen. And like you do have trusted resources and people out there that can support you and that you can get through this. It's just important to know that there are quality resources and tools out there that are not sold or marketed through like sales products, etc.
Stuff that really makes a difference from the heart. From the heart and not the wallet, for sure. No, I love that. It's yeah, you talk about emotionally encoded money. A lot of times I see the case where maybe the spouse worked for a particular company and that kind of represents the spouse, and it's literally as if selling a share of that is watching the death again or feeling the death again. It's hard. It's really
Yes.
hard, and it's real, and it has to be gently balanced with empathy and consideration because there is a tie to that person back to that. And as a fiduciary, we as fiduciaries have the responsibility to understand that and to be sensitive to that, but also encourage that, right? If they're so concentrated in that their risk of future is perhaps degraded by something happening with that one stock, like it's our job to do that, but to do it with empathy and consideration, realizing, as you said, this is part of that person and we have to be really careful. All right, we're almost out of time, but I have to ask you one more question. You've done a lot of education around communication and how to speak emotionally and how to be empathetic to advisors. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing that advisors say to be a little more sensitive, a little more connecting, a little more able to create a safe space, what would it be?
So I believe advisors do a pretty great job of expressing empathy, but I think in this moment is where they have to like flex the empathy more than ever. And so I would say I would want them to make sure that they're practicing empathy when table stakes are lower so that they can be successful when table stakes are higher. Additionally, maybe it's not something that they say, but it is active listening. There are ways to listen to respond, or there's ways to listen to hear. And I think sometimes we're like two steps ahead. We're like, we know you need to do this. We know you need to do this, but they're not listening. They're not active listening. So I don't think it's something that they're saying. I think it's really centered around active listening and making sure that their clients can feel heard, especially, they have the stats that like 70% of individuals fire their advisor within 24 months. That actually likely has been debunked by the new Cerulli data, showing that individuals will actually stay with financial professionals longer. That data was really centered around insurance policies, right? So they would
Interesting.
go to like a new provider versus,
Interesting.
and it really is around having that activist listening. But what's important for financial professionals is that they start that active listening earlier than the death, right? And making sure that everybody has a seat at the table when it impacts their own financial
Love that.
picture.
Love that. You don't know how many couples, especially new couples that come to me, and you probably see the same thing when you look at the wife and ask her questions or say, "What do you think about that?" I'm surprised at the number of times they say, "Interesting. I've never been asked that in my whole time with another advisor." Isn't that crazy? Yeah, it's just like, and you gotta get them both there because it takes two. And I'm so grateful for and so much praise the women that have husband and wife still alive when they show up to the meetings.
Yes.
And I say, look, thanks for being here. I know this isn't the most exciting stuff you're going to hear. There's a lot of other things you'd rather do, but just the fact that you're here listening and you're somewhat aware, even though you may not understand all of the details of this, you've really relied on your spouse to do that and he's done a great job. But the fact that you're here puts you miles ahead of a day when he's most likely gone before you. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Lindsey, because that is super important for any other advisors that are watching the podcast. So
I do have one other tip for advisors that
please,
I think is really
please.
important. So a lot of people will reach out to the family like right after the death, but calling them a year after the death of their loved one, a lot of folks do not reach out. Even sometimes the kids won't reach out or, other people forget and they move on. And so that can be like a really big point there. And even for anyone who's listening who's experienced death or has someone close to them that's experienced death, just a quick 5-minute phone call, one calendar year after, just to check in goes so far for people because it really does show that you care about them and their well-being.
That's awesome. Love it. And don't ever say it's okay. They're in a better place.
No, no.
Terrible. There's a lot
Terrible.
of that verbiage that we just have to change. So, Lindsey, you're awesome. Thank you for your work, for your research, for your knowledge and sharing that with us today on Wins for Widows. If this episode was helpful for listeners, share it if you would with a widow that's at that intersection of grief and finance, or someone who loves someone who's experienced loss. You can subscribe to the channel so that it helps others find our work. And we're building a community here so that widows can feel safe and find their footing at whatever pace you're comfortable. Lindsey, it's an honor walking alongside of you in this journey. Thank you for connecting and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.